I first knew something was wrong when a woman with a clipboard stopped in front of my driveway and took 3 photos of my brick wall before even saying hello. That was my introduction to Denise, the HOA president who treated every inch of our suburban neighborhood like her personal kingdom. I was halfway through replacing my old wooden fence with reinforced masonry when she appeared, sun visor tilted like a general inspecting the troops. She didn't even introduce herself before barking, "You can't build that fortress in a community like ours." I told her calmly that my fence wasn't a fortress, just solid, something that might actually last longer than a picket fence held together by paint and hope. Denise pursed her lips like she'd just tasted lemon juice and scribbled something on her clipboard. That's when I knew I'd been marked. My project started after a string of burglaries hit nearby neighborhood. I travel often for work, so I wanted peace of mind, a few security upgrades, motion lights, metal gates, maybe reinforced shutters. Nothing insane. But once Denise caught wind of it, she acted like I was converting my house into a bunker for doomsday. A week later, I got a formal HOA notice with bold letters screaming, "Excessive fortification in violation of community aesthetic." I laughed out loud. Who even writes like that? Still, I tried to be diplomatic. I emailed her, explaining that everything I was doing was within code and approved by the city inspector. She replied with a 5-paragraph manifesto about maintaining harmony and discouraging fear-based architecture. Her words, not mine. The next day, I found her standing in my yard with another board member, pointing at my metal shutters like they were weapons of war. I walked over and asked if she needed something. "We're concerned you're sending the wrong message," she said. I told her the only message I cared about was, "This house is safe." She frowned, said she'd take this to the board, and stormed off. That was her favorite phrase, "Take it to the board." It meant she'd spend the next week rallying other retirees with too much free time to vote on what color mailboxes should be. I honestly didn't think much of it, until I got the fine. It came in the mail 2 days later. $500 for unauthorized fortification. I called her immediately, trying to stay calm. She answered on speakerphone, probably so the whole board could listen. I asked her what rule I'd violated. She said my security modifications broke the clause about maintaining the neighborhood's open and friendly appearance. I told her the same clause also required safety and maintenance of property. She paused, realizing I'd read the bylaws better than she had, then snapped, "You're intimidating the community." I couldn't help it, I laughed. "With bricks?" I asked. She hung up. That night, I added motion-sensing floodlights. If she thought bricks were intimidating, she was going to hate what came next. By the weekend, my house looked like a modern fortress, clean, strong, and honestly beautiful. Neighbors actually complimented it. Everyone except Denise. She sent 2 more letters demanding I cease fortification immediately. When I ignored her, she tried a different angle. She came by during my lunch break with a man in a suit, her so-called legal consultant. He started spouting about potential liens and property violations. I handed him copies of my city permits and said, "You might want to read those before threatening me." The man blinked, clearly realizing Denise hadn't told him I was fully approved. He muttered something about misunderstanding and left. Denise looked like she wanted to scream. For a few quiet weeks, I thought she'd finally given up. I even started planting shrubs along the wall to make it look nicer. Then came the storm. A literal one. A massive system rolled through one Friday evening, wind, hail, rain sideways. Half the neighborhood lost power. I was inside watching through my reinforced windows when I noticed flashlights bobbing outside. People were trying to secure patio furniture and garbage bins that were flying down the street. I stayed put. My lights flickered but never went out thanks to the backup generator I'd installed. The one Denise said was visually aggressive. It hummed steadily while the rest of the block went dark. An hour later, there was pounding at my door. I opened it to find Denise, drenched, hair plastered to her forehead, flashlight trembling in her hand. Behind her stood 3 other HOA members, equally soaked and miserable. She yelled over the wind, "The clubhouse roof just came off. We need a safe place until emergency services arrive." I almost laughed at the irony. The same woman who'd spent weeks telling me to de-fortify my home was now begging to come inside the one structure built to withstand a hurricane. I looked at the storm tearing through the street behind her, then back at her shivering group. "Of course," I said, stepping aside. "Come in." The moment they entered, their tone shifted. They gawked at my interior like they'd stepped into another world. Reinforced windows, solid steel doorframes, backup lights glowing soft and steady. Denise muttered something about overkill, but her voice lacked conviction. I handed them towels and hot tea from the emergency thermos. She kept pacing near the window, mumbling about HOA liability for storm damage. Then another gust hit, the kind that makes the house vibrate, and everyone ducked instinctively. Except me. My walls didn't even creak. When the storm finally calmed, Denise's phone buzzed with updates. 2 houses down the street had major roof damage, and fallen branches had crushed fences across the neighborhood. My property? Not a scratch. She stared at me for a long moment before saying quietly, "You were right to fortify." I didn't say anything. I just offered her another towel. By morning, the sky was clear, and the neighborhood looked like a war zone. Fallen trees, shingles everywhere, power lines down. People wandered the streets in disbelief. My lights were still on, and my house stood untouched. That morning, Denise called an emergency HOA meeting in my living room. She asked to discuss recovery logistics. It was surreal watching the same board that fined me for building too defensively, now using my Wi-Fi and charging their phones on my outlet. They tried to sound professional, but the embarrassment was thick in the air. One member even joked that maybe the HOA should issue fortification permits next time. Denise didn't laugh. When she finally addressed me directly, she tried to frame her apology as collaboration. "We may have misjudged your intentions," she said, eyes flicking toward my still-running generator. I smiled politely and said, "That's understandable. Sometimes preparedness looks like paranoia until it pays off." By afternoon, city inspectors arrived to assess the damage. They asked if they could use my property as a staging point for cleanup because it was structurally safest. Denise looked like she'd swallowed her tongue. I said yes, of course. As workers unloaded supplies in my driveway, HOA members huddled under my porch, taking notes about debris removal. Denise stayed quiet, occasionally glancing at my wall like it had personally humiliated her. Before she left, she said, "We'll revisit your citations." I nodded. She meant they'd quietly erase the fines rather than publicly admit defeat. That evening, after everyone left, I stood in my yard watching the sun set over the wrecked neighborhood. My wall cast a long shadow across the street, strong and unbroken. I'd built it for peace of mind, not to prove a point, but somehow it had done both. Then my phone buzzed again. Another HOA email, this one from Denise herself. Subject line: Proposal, Community Fortification Initiative. I opened it, and there it was, an official plan for the HOA to adopt enhanced property safety standards modeled after recent successful examples. Translation: Copy everything I did. I closed the email and laughed until my ribs hurt. The same woman who fined me for being intimidating now wanted to make my design the new standard. I thought about replying with something snarky, but decided silence would sting more. Let her write the next rulebook while pretending it was her idea. I'd already won. 2 days after the storm, I woke up to find 3 men in reflective vests walking around my yard with clipboards. For a second, I thought they were from the city cleanup crew, until I saw Denise trailing behind them, holding her usual binder of HOA bylaws. I stepped outside, coffee in hand, and called out, "You folks doing inspections again?" One of the men turned and said, "We are part of the HOA Structural Review Committee." I nearly spat out my coffee. They had a committee now? Denise smiled like a proud queen unveiling her royal guards. "We're conducting post-storm evaluations for compliance," she said sweetly. "We want to make sure repairs follow the new aesthetic guidelines." Translation: she was trying to reassert control after losing face. I told them politely that my house hadn't sustained any damage and didn't need inspection. Denise's smile faltered. "That's precisely why we're interested," she replied. "Your house's resilience could impact neighborhood uniformity." I stared at her for a beat. "You mean it survived too well?" One of her committee members, an older man named Gary, cleared his throat and said, "We just want to ensure no one property overshadows others." I looked at the collapsed fences down the street, the blue tarps flapping over roofs, and said, "Trust me, nobody's overshadowing anyone right now." Then I went back inside, locked the door, and watched them through the security camera as they circled my house, taking pictures like paparazzi. That evening, a new letter appeared on my porch. This one wasn't a fine, it was a community compliance request. According to Denise, my generator's constant hum was creating psychological unease among recovering residents. I had to laugh. The entire block smelled like wet insulation and chainsaw fuel, but apparently my quiet, muffled generator was the real nuisance. Still, I knew her game: death by paperwork. If she couldn't beat me with logic, she'd drown me in bureaucracy. I wrote back that I'd gladly shut it off, if the HOA guaranteed power restoration within 24 hours. She didn't respond. Over the next week, the HOA started reconstruction coordination. They put up a tent in the park and handed out clipboards to volunteers who mostly stood around complaining. Denise loved the spotlight, giving speeches about community resilience as if she'd been the hero of the storm. But cracks were showing. Residents were angry that the HOA emergency fund hadn't helped anyone yet. Some even whispered that Denise had used part of it to upgrade the clubhouse roof that blew away. Meanwhile, I kept quietly helping my neighbors, loaning out my generator for an hour here, my tools there, storing frozen food in my spare freezer. People started calling my house the safe zone. Then came the second storm. Smaller but meaner. The forecast said minor flooding, yet by midnight, water was pooling at the base of driveways. My sump pumps kicked in automatically. Denise, however, had other priorities. She was outside in a raincoat, yelling orders into a walkie-talkie like she was commanding a disaster movie. I saw her through my window trying to redirect water with plastic boards. It didn't work. Within minutes, her front yard looked like a shallow pond. Then came the call. "We need your help," she said breathlessly over the phone. "Our basement's flooding. You have pumps, don't you?" For a second I considered saying no. But I couldn't let her house flood. It would only hurt her elderly husband, who I'd seen limping around with a cane. So I grabbed one of my backup pumps and went over. Denise's house was chaos. Water gushed from the foundation vents, boxes floated near the laundry area, and she was ankle-deep yelling, "Don't just stand there, do something!" I installed the pump, hooked it to a spare hose, and within 15 minutes, the water started draining. She stood there, drenched, humiliated, and whispered, "Thank you." When I left, she called after me, "I suppose your preparations came in handy." I didn't answer. She didn't need words. The look on her face said it all. The next morning, my doorbell rang again. Denise stood there with a clipboard, of course. She handed me an envelope labeled Proposal for Neighborhood Security Integration. Inside was a printed plan for all residents to install security lights, generators, and reinforced doors, based on successful models already implemented locally. My model, obviously. I skimmed through it. She'd even copied the wording from my building permit. At the bottom, it said, "Pilot Project Coordinator, Denise Harper." Not a single mention of me. I bit my tongue to keep from laughing. Instead, I asked, "So, will I finally be in compliance under your new rules?" She hesitated, realizing the trap. "Well, technically yes, but..." I cut her off. Then consider me a proud, early adopter." She forced a smile and left. That night, the neighborhood group chat exploded. Denise had sent a long message praising our collective commitment to resilience, complete with photos of my property as an example of successful adaptation. People started tagging me, thanking me for starting the movement. Denise quickly deleted the post. But by then, screenshots were everywhere. I became a local legend. Her ego couldn't handle it. The next week, she called another HOA meeting, this time at the rebuilt clubhouse. I attended out of curiosity. She'd printed charts, graphs, and even a PowerPoint labeled Community Fortification Vision 2030. Half the slides were blurry photos of my house. I watched silently as she explained her system of layered safety and structural strength. When one neighbor asked why I wasn't listed as co-developer, she said, "He provided inspiration, not leadership." That earned a few skeptical looks. Then came the kicker. She proposed new HOA fees for community safety compliance. In short, everyone would pay for improvements that mirrored mine, but through the HOA at inflated costs. Someone immediately asked if Denise's construction company, registered under her cousin's name, would be doing the work. The room turned quiet. She stammered something about competitive bidding. People murmured angrily. The meeting ended without a vote. Afterward, I overheard two neighbors say, "We should have let him run the HOA instead." I smiled to myself and left quietly. By the weekend, things took another turn. A city inspector came by, unannounced. He said someone had filed a complaint about my unauthorized stormwater modifications. I showed him the permits and paperwork. He sighed and said, "I figured as much. These complaints always trace back to the same few addresses." He left shaking his head. 10 minutes later, I saw Denise watching from her window. I decided enough was enough. That night, I started my own small project, a proper retaining wall along the side of my property. Legal, permitted, and fully within code. But it looked imposing, and that drove her insane. The next morning, she cornered me outside, trying to sound casual. "You really think all this is necessary?" she asked, gesturing to the half-built wall. "It's just a little overprotective, don't you think?" I smiled. "You said it yourself, we're building a resilient community. I'm just leading by example." Her face twitched. Within days, the resentment around her leadership started boiling over. People wanted transparency about the emergency funds. Someone discovered the HOA's account had paid for consulting fees, suspiciously close to the cost of new landscaping at Denise's house. The whispers became open accusations. She tried to hold an emergency board meeting to defend herself, but half the members didn't show up. The neighborhood Facebook page was full of memes comparing her to a dictator who hid in my bunker. I didn't post any of them, but I didn't delete them either. One afternoon, while I was working on the wall, Denise marched up again, furious. "Are you happy now?" she snapped. "You've turned everyone against me." I leaned on my shovel and said, "I didn't turn anyone. You just showed them who you are." She opened her mouth, then closed it again, speechless. For the first time, I saw fear instead of arrogance. She muttered something about legal recourse and stormed off. A week later, a notice appeared on every door. HOA President resignation effective immediately. No explanation, no replacement named. Just a quiet exit. I heard later that the board demanded she step down after an audit revealed misuse of funds. Some neighbors wanted to press charges. I stayed out of it. The storm had done its work, just not the kind that comes from the sky. Still, I wasn't done fortifying. The floods, the chaos, and the power plays had taught me something. Strength isn't about isolation, it's about independence. I installed solar panels with battery storage, sealed the new retaining wall, and added a stormproof awning. When people passed by, they waved, sometimes stopping to ask advice. The same folks who once mocked my bunker aesthetic now wanted to copy it. But I couldn't shake the feeling that Denise wasn't finished. A woman like her doesn't disappear quietly. She'd been humiliated, yes, but humiliation is fuel for people like that. I expected her to sell the house and vanish. Instead, one night, I saw her car parked near the HOA office long after dark. Lights flickered inside, shadows moving. Something told me she was planning a comeback, and knowing Denise, it wouldn't be small. The first clue came the next morning, tucked under my windshield wiper, a notice stamped in red, Property Security Audit Pending, authorized by emergency ordinance. No HOA letterhead this time. Just the city logo. I frowned. It looked official. Too official. I didn't know it yet, but this wasn't just another HOA stunt. Denise had escalated far beyond her neighborhood kingdom. She'd gone to the city itself. And this time, she wasn't just fighting for power. She was fighting for revenge. Storm, the wall, and a group of neighbors standing together. Someone had painted a faint silhouette of a woman holding a clipboard in the background, almost invisible, but there if you looked closely. Denise's ghost, watching over her rebuilt empire. Claire nudged me as people took photos. You know they're going to tell this story for decades, right? I shrugged. As long as they remember the lesson. She smiled. That paranoia pays? No, I said. That storms don't destroy communities. Ego does. The mural became a local landmark. Tourists stopped for pictures. Every time a new homeowner moved in, they'd hear the same story. How one man's stubbornness and one woman's obsession clashed until both built something unbreakable. I still get calls now and then, from journalists, from city officials, sometimes from Denise. She always starts the same way. Got a new storm on the horizon. And I always answer, then let's get ready. Last week, a package arrived, no note this time, just a small framed photo. It was Denise standing beside a new wall in another county, smiling, hand resting on the bricks. On the back she'd written, Version 2.0, your blueprint. I hung it in the hallway. Not as a trophy but as a reminder. The war between us had started over control, but it ended in cooperation. She'd taken the very thing she fought against and turned it into her life's work. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd just backed down, painted the fence white, and pretended everything was fine. Maybe the storms would have flattened us all. Maybe Denise would still be running meetings about mailbox colors. But fate has a sense of irony. It takes conflict to build resilience, and it takes stubbornness to turn enemies into allies. That night, as rain tapped softly against the windows, I walked outside and touched the old wall. The bricks were cold but solid, each one a chapter in a story that started with defiance and ended with respect. From beyond the horizon, thunder rolled faintly, distant, harmless for now. I smiled and whispered to no one in particular, let it come. Because this time we were ready. When I saw the official seal on that notice, I thought it had to be fake. Denise wasn't dumb enough to forge a government document, or at least, I hoped not. But the longer I stared at the letter, the more legitimate it looked. The city emblem, an ordinance number, and a date for a mandatory property inspection. I called the listed number and got a recorded message confirming an audit under Emergency Infrastructure Review Initiative. That wasn't HOA language. That was City Hall. Somehow, Denise had managed to turn her personal grudge into municipal paperwork. I decided to be ready. When the inspectors arrived 2 days later, they came in an unmarked pickup, 3 men in polos with city badges. One of them introduced himself as Mr. Alvarez. He was polite, professional, and looked uncomfortable to even be there. You've been flagged for a random security compliance audit, he said, reading from his clipboard. Recent neighborhood complaints suggested excessive modifications that may affect emergency access. I asked who complained. He gave a tight smile. We're not permitted to say. Translation, everyone knew. I led them around the property. They checked the retaining wall, generator enclosure, and flood pump. Every measurement was within code. I had documents for everything. After half an hour, Alvarez sighed and said, Honestly, sir, This is one of the safest, cleanest properties I've inspected all month. Someone clearly wanted to waste your time. He shook my hand and promised a favorable report. I offered them coffee before they left. They accepted, looking almost relieved. I suspected this wasn't their first run-in with HOA weaponization. The next day, Denise's car was parked at City Hall. I saw her while driving by, standing in the lobby, arguing with a clerk who looked ready to quit. I didn't stop. I knew she was filing something else. She'd lost her HOA power, so now she wanted to become a martyr, a concerned citizen fighting unsafe private fortresses. 2 weeks later, it reached the news. A small local outlet ran a story titled, "Neighborhood Divided Over Bunker-Style Homes." It quoted an unnamed resident who warned that individual fortifications disrupt emergency response. The photo showed my wall in the background. Denise had gone public. The comments section, however, didn't go how she planned. Most readers sided with me. "Man just built something solid. Why's that bad?" one wrote. Another said, "Wish my neighbor cared this much about safety." The post got traction on local Reddit, and soon people were calling me Fort Guy. It became a joke, but one that worked in my favor. Denise must have hated every second. She went quiet for a while. Then came phase 2. I found a flyer taped to my mailbox. Community Open Forum, The Hidden Dangers of Overfortification. Guest speaker, former HOA President Denise Harper. I nearly choked laughing. She was hosting an anti-fortification seminar. My neighbor Claire, who lived 2 houses down, texted me a photo of it with the caption, "She's obsessed." Still, curiosity got the better of me. The night of the forum, I showed up and sat quietly in the back. Denise stood at a podium in the community center, complete with a projector and bullet point slide. Her first image? My house again. "This is what happens," she said dramatically, "when fear replaces trust." She clicked to the next slide showing a stock photo of a bunker door. These modifications divide neighbors, obstruct first responders, and create a culture of suspicion. People shifted uncomfortably. One man raised his hand. "Didn't his house save you during the storm?" he asked. The room murmured. Denise's smile wobbled. "That's irrelevant," she snapped. "We're talking about long-term consequences." Another neighbor muttered, "Like keeping people safe?" A few people chuckled. She tried to recover, talking about aesthetic harmony, but the energy was gone. When she finally dismissed everyone, half the room left before the Q&A. As people filed out, a local reporter approached me. "You're the homeowner she mentioned, right?" she asked. I nodded. "Mind if I show your side?" I shrugged. "Sure, why not?" The next day, her article went viral in the county. "The Man Who Built the House That Saved the HOA." It detailed how Denise had fined me, mocked me, and then begged for shelter. The comments were brutal. Denise deleted her social media accounts by morning. For a brief, shining week, peace returned. Then came the letter that changed everything. Notice of Zoning Reconsideration. According to it, the City Council was reviewing community infrastructure amendments that could restrict private fortification features exceeding standard residential parameters. It didn't name me, but it might as well have. The proposal required any protective installations over a certain height or material strength to undergo special approval. Guess who proposed it? Denise Harper, citizen advisor. I wasn't going to sit quietly while she rewrote the law to spite me. I filed to speak at the next council meeting. I spent a full day organizing documents, permits, storm reports, photos of her taking shelter in my house, even testimony from neighbors I'd help. When my turn came, the council chamber was packed. Denise sat in the front row, pretending not to see me. When they called my name, I stepped to the microphone and said, "Good evening. My name's Mark Bennett. Some of you may know me as the man who built the fortress." A few chuckles rippled through the audience. I continued, "I didn't build a fortress. I built responsibly, because preparation isn't paranoia." When the storm hit, this community didn't need speeches or bylaws. It needed shelter. And that so-called fortress kept people alive. I showed photos. The HOA members huddled in my living room, Denise herself sipping tea while the wind howled outside. Gasps filled the room. Denise's face went pale. I finished with, "If you pass this amendment, you won't be protecting aesthetics, you'll be punishing foresight." The crowd applauded. Even a council member said, "Frankly, Mr. Bennett, we could use more residents like you." The proposal died that night, 3 votes to 2. Denise left before the meeting ended, head down. I thought that would be the end, but people like her don't quit, they retreat and reload. The next morning, someone spray-painted the word paranoid on my driveway. I checked my security footage. The figure wore a raincoat and gloves, but the walk was familiar, tight shoulders, stiff gait. I didn't report it, I just cleaned it off and upgraded my cameras to 4K. But inside, I knew the war had turned personal again. Days later, I noticed subtle things. My mail started arriving opened. Trash collection skipped my house twice. A city inspector showed up. 6 months after the second storm, the neighborhood no longer looked like the one I'd moved into. Half the homes had been rebuilt with stronger walls and steel-reinforced roofs. Solar panels glinted on every block. The city installed new drainage lines and upgraded the power grid, using data collected from my system as a prototype. My house, once mocked as a fortress, was now the model they copied. The city even renamed our subdivision Haven Crest. A little dramatic, but after everything, it fit. Life had finally quieted down. The constant hammering of construction was replaced by the low hum of recovery. Claire and I had become something like unofficial coordinators for neighborhood maintenance. People trusted me now. The same folks who once voted to fine me for being too defensive now asked for my advice on flood-proof paint and generator capacity. Every Sunday, we held open meetings under the rebuilt park pavilion. No power struggles, no bylaws shouted across tables. Just coffee, laughter, and planning. The new HOA board was smaller, friendlier, and focused on practical things. The first rule they passed? All homes must maintain minimum storm safety standards. I signed that one with a grin. Denise hadn't been seen since she drove away that spring morning. Rumors drifted through social media. Some said she moved north, others claimed she was helping with rebuilding efforts near the coast. I didn't know what to believe until one day an envelope arrived in my mailbox. No return address, just a single line on the front. For Mark Bennett, personal. Inside was a short letter in Denise's sharp handwriting. Mark, you were right about everything. I've joined the State Emergency Coordination Board. They're hiring people with real-world disaster experience. I told them about you. They might reach out. I've stopped fighting storms and started preparing for them. I read it twice before realizing what it meant. Denise had turned her obsession with control into something useful. The woman who once weaponized bylaws now worked on public safety. I couldn't help but smile. Maybe she really had evolved. A month later, a black SUV pulled up in front of my house. A man in a crisp jacket introduced himself as part of the State Resilience Task Force. "We're building a new disaster preparedness program," he said, "and one of our consultants, Denise Harper, recommended you as a technical advisor." I must have laughed longer than was polite. "You're telling me the woman who tried to fine me for brick walls just got me a government job?" He grinned. "Apparently she thinks you're the reason half this city still has standing houses." That's how I ended up on the state's design committee, sitting across from engineers, city planners, and the same bureaucrats who once sided with HOA complaints. My role was small, just consultation, but it felt poetic. Every time I reviewed a proposal for stronger structures, I remembered that first letter from the HOA calling my upgrades excessive fortification. Meanwhile, Haven Crest thrived. Insurance rates dropped, property values soared, and the community developed a quiet sense of pride. We even built a memorial garden for the families displaced by the storms. In the center stood a bronze plaque that read, "Preparedness is not paranoia. It's love disguised as foresight." Claire claimed she stole that line from something I'd said during the cleanup. I told her she was giving me too much credit, but she said, "You earned it." One late afternoon in August, I was trimming the hedges when a silver sedan rolled up. Out stepped Denise, different now. Her hair was shorter, streaked with gray, and she carried no clipboard. She looked around at the rebuilt homes, the fortified fences, the solar arrays. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "You did it." I shook my head. "We did it. You started half of it, even if you didn't mean to." She laughed, the sound lighter than I remembered. Funny how a feud can rebuild a city. We sat on the porch drinking lemonade like old neighbors. She told me about her new job, how she traveled county to county helping towns update their emergency codes. "When I walk into meetings now," she said, "I quote you. I tell them about the man who built a wall everyone hated until it saved their lives." I raised an eyebrow. "You quote me?" She nodded. "You taught me that rules without reason are just noise. I used to enforce noise." Before leaving, she handed me a folder labeled Community Resilience Award nomination. She winked. "Consider it my final submission." Inside were nomination papers with my name on them. "Don't embarrass me by refusing," she said. I watched her car disappear down the same street she once patrolled like a dictator. Only this time it felt like a proper goodbye. The award came 3 months later. Local, nothing fancy, but meaningful. They called it the Citizen Shield. I accepted it at City Hall in front of a crowd that included half the neighborhood. Even the mayor showed up again. "Some people build fences to keep others out," he said during his speech. Mark built one to keep everyone safe. When the applause faded, I spotted Denise standing near the back, clapping quietly. She didn't stay for photos. She just gave me a small salute and slipped out. After that, life returned to normal again, quiet, steady, almost too peaceful. Sometimes I missed the absurdity. The endless letters, the arguments, even the ridiculous structural committee. Chaos had a strange rhythm once you'd lived in it long enough. One evening, while sorting old papers, I found the original HOA violation notice. Yellowed, edges curled. Excessive fortification in violation of community aesthetic. I pinned it above my desk next to the new award certificate. Side by side, they told the whole story better than words ever could. Months later, I got another message from Denise. This time a short voicemail. "They're implementing your design standards statewide. Congratulations, Fort Guy." Then laughter, and the line went dead. She'd kept her humor, at least. By the following spring, Haven Crest held its first Resilience Fair. Kids climbed over sandbag displays, vendors sold backup batteries, and the new HOA, now just called the Neighborhood Council, hosted a barbecue. They unveiled a commemorative mural showing the claiming a noise complaint about constant humming machinery. My generator hadn't even been running. I realized Denise was weaponizing bureaucracy one report at a time, harassment disguised as paperwork. So I flipped the script. I compiled every incident, timestamp, and recording. Then I submitted a pattern of malicious reporting claim to the city's ombudsman, attaching evidence. Bureaucracy works both ways. 2 weeks later, I got a call from Alvarez, the same inspector who'd visited before. "Just wanted to let you know," he said, "we found misuse of city channels tied to an individual under investigation. You'll have no more surprise audits." His tone suggested he knew exactly who it was. That night, my porch camera caught Denise standing across the street, staring at my house. No clipboard this time. Just silence. Then she walked away. For the first time, I felt something close to pity. All her authority, all her power, and now she was just another neighbor with nothing left to control. But karma wasn't done. A month later, the insurance adjusters arrived for final storm damage claims. Apparently, Denise had exaggerated her losses to get reimbursement, listing repairs that were never done. One of the adjusters asked to verify details. When they found her receipts matched work done on her cousin's landscaping company, things unraveled fast. Within weeks, she faced an investigation for fraud. Neighbors whispered about it, but nobody intervened. The same people she once ruled with fines and memos now avoided her completely. Her mailbox overflowed. Her once perfect lawn grew patchy. She'd become a ghost haunting her own HOA. One evening, I saw her walking slowly past my driveway, shoulders slumped, no visor, no binder. She stopped and looked at my wall again. Then, to my shock, she said softly, "You were right." Before I could reply, she kept walking. I thought that was closure. But as I watched her disappear into the dark, I couldn't shake the feeling she was planning one last move. Denise wasn't the kind to surrender, she was the kind to pivot. And I was about to find out just how far she'd go when cornered. I took it but didn't burn it. I just folded it back up and tucked it in the emergency binder. Better to keep the evidence, I said. Reminds us how quickly sense can get voted out of a community. She nodded, staring at the flickering generator light. For the first time, Denise looked human. No mask, no control games. Just a woman who'd finally run out of walls to hide behind. I offered her a cup of coffee. She accepted with a small smile. "You're a better neighbor than I ever was," she said. "Maybe we both learned something," I replied. When the rescue teams finally evacuated families to temporary shelters, Denise refused to go. "I'll stay here," she said. "Help with cleanup. I owe this neighborhood that much." And she did. Over the next week, she worked harder than anyone, clearing branches, coordinating deliveries, comforting people who'd lost everything. Some neighbors even apologized to her, forgiving the past. The storm had leveled everything: power, property, pride. But somehow, it had built something stronger in return. Unity. People stopped arguing about mailbox paint and fence height. They started talking about sandbags, drainage flow, solar backup, community safety drills. One afternoon, as the sun finally came out, Denise stood beside me looking over the wreckage. "It's strange," she said. "All that control I tried to keep through rules, and it took losing everything to finally feel peace." I nodded. "Control doesn't keep you safe. Understanding does." She smiled. "You should put that on a plaque." When the news crews came back for follow-up footage, they asked if she'd give a statement. She did, standing right beside me. "I was wrong," she said on camera. "We punished preparation when we should have encouraged it. This house saved our lives." That clip went viral too. The comments didn't mock her this time. They thanked her. For once, she wasn't the villain. She was just someone who learned the hard way. As cleanup continued, Denise told me she was planning to move out of the neighborhood anyway. "Too many ghosts," she said. "But I'm going to rebuild somewhere higher and stronger." She grinned faintly. "Maybe even call it Fort Harper." When she finally drove away weeks later, the street was lined with neighbors waving goodbye. Claire whispered, "Think she'll really change?" I watched the car disappear and said, "People like her don't change, they evolve." That night, I stood by the wall again, the same wall that started it all. The air was calm, the generator silent, the lights warm. The storm had taken everything fragile and left behind everything strong. I didn't see Denise for nearly a month after her insurance scandal broke. Rumor had it she'd stepped down from every committee she was on and spent her days writing formal rebuttals to anyone who so much as mentioned her name online. I figured that was the end of it. People like Denise burn bright and fast, loud enough to dominate the room, quiet when the walls start closing in. I'd finally returned to normal life. The neighborhood was peaceful. For once, nobody was knocking on my door about aesthetic harmony. Then, one Monday morning, I found a letter with an official city seal again. My stomach sank. But this time, it wasn't a complaint, it was an invitation. You are requested to attend a community resilience panel to share your experience in property preparedness. It was from the city council. They wanted me to speak at a local safety seminar about storm-proofing homes. I laughed. The same community that had mocked me for over-fortifying now wanted to hold me up as a model citizen. I accepted immediately. The seminar was set in the same community center where Denise once lectured about the dangers of fear-based architecture. I walked in to find news cameras, a local news anchor, and even a few emergency management officials. The mayor gave an opening speech about everyday resilience. Then it was my turn. I kept it simple, told the story of the storm, the upgrades I'd done, how preparation wasn't paranoia. I even cracked a few jokes about the HOA's enthusiastic feedback. The room laughed. The mayor shook my hand and said, "If more residents followed your example, this city would save millions in damage costs." Denise was in the back row. I didn't notice her until the applause started. She wasn't smiling. She was recording. After the event, she approached me in the parking lot. Her tone was unnervingly calm. "Congratulations," she said. "You've finally turned paranoia into celebrity." I smiled politely. "Thanks. It's nice to be appreciated." She leaned closer. "Enjoy it while it lasts. The city's not done with you." Then she walked away. I didn't know it yet, but she was about to prove that a cornered bureaucrat is more dangerous than a storm. 3 days later, I got another visit. This time from a man in a navy suit with a clipboard and a badge reading, Office of Civil Safety Oversight. He introduced himself as Mr. Ramsey. "We received concerns," he said carefully, "about the legality of your storm modifications affecting neighboring runoff systems." My jaw tightened. Denise again. Ramsey wasn't hostile, just cautious. He explained that a citizen complaint alleged that my retaining wall diverted water into adjacent properties. I walked him along the property line and showed him the drainage layout, professionally designed, city approved. He nodded, checked his notes, and said, "Looks fine to me, but I'll file an official clearance just in case." As he left, I asked, "Was this complaint from a Mrs. Harper by any chance?" He didn't answer, but the flicker in his eyes said enough. That night, I checked the city's online record. Sure enough, a new file had appeared. Civil complaint #47B, alleged structural interference by property 318. Complainant, Denise Harper. She was officially trying to sue me for indirect property damage. It was absurd. Her lawyer claimed my wall altered hydrological balance and caused excessive pooling during storms. There hadn't been a drop of rain in 2 weeks. I wasn't worried, but I was done playing defense. I gathered everything. Her fines, her false reports, her quotes to the press, even the footage of her begging for shelter in my house. My lawyer, an old friend named Tom, chuckled when he saw the file. "She's self-destructing," he said. "You don't need to fight this hard, you just need to let her talk." The hearing was scheduled for a Wednesday morning. It wasn't in a grand courtroom, just a municipal boardroom with fluorescent lights and tired chairs. Denise sat across the table, wearing a pastel suit and a forced smile. Her lawyer, a man half her age, shuffled papers nervously. When the clerk asked her to explain her claim, she launched into a dramatic speech about unchecked individualism threatening communal safety. It sounded rehearsed, almost theatrical. Then it was my turn. I kept my voice calm, almost bored. Everything I've built was inspected, approved, and even used as emergency shelter by this same complainant during a storm event. I played a short clip from my security camera, Denise stepping through my door during the storm, thanking me under her breath. The board members exchanged looks. Her lawyer's face turned red. When the chairwoman asked if she wanted to respond, Denise stammered, "That's irrelevant context." I added gently, "It's relevant to show that my property improvements prevented harm, not caused it." The board dismissed her complaint on the spot. No deliberation. Just a unanimous vote. Case closed. As we walked out, Denise glared at me like she could burn a hole through the air. "You think this makes you untouchable," she hissed. "But everyone slips up eventually." I shrugged. "Maybe. But when I do, I'll have flood insurance." For the next few weeks, she vanished again. No letters, no inspections, no drama. I almost forgot about her. Until one night, around midnight, I got a call from my neighbor Claire. "Mark," she whispered, "you might want to look outside." I opened my window and froze. Denise was in the middle of the street, wearing a reflective vest, hammering a sign into the ground. Even from a distance, I could read the words, "Protected Zone, Private Bunker Under Investigation." She'd made it look like an official city notice. I grabbed my phone and started recording. By the time I stepped outside, she was gone. Just her car speeding away. I called the police. Not because I wanted her arrested, but because this was crossing into criminal territory. An officer came, looked at the sign, and sighed. "We've had complaints about her before," he said. "She's been warned." He took a report and removed the sign. The next morning, the video went viral. Claire had posted it on the neighborhood Facebook page with the caption, "Denise strikes again." Local news picked it up. The clip of her hammering that fake sign under a streetlight was too absurd not to share. Within 24 hours, it had 500,000 views. People started calling her the HOA ghost. Someone even edited spooky music over the footage. The forecast was grim. The news called it a once-in-a-century system. The same pattern that wrecked half the state last time was reforming, stronger, faster, meaner. It was heading straight for us. I read the email from Denise 3 times that night, trying to decide whether it was an act of concern or guilt. "Don't let them stop you." It didn't sound like the old Denise. It sounded like someone who'd finally seen the cost of her own pride. I didn't reply. Instead, I got to work. I checked the generator fuel, inspected the shutters, cleared the drainage lines. My property was ready, but the neighborhood wasn't. Most people had grown complacent again. The city promised new flood barriers, but only a fraction were installed. Claire and a few others came by, asking if I could help them secure their windows. Word spread quickly. By nightfall, half the block was in my driveway with drills, extension cords, and plywood. We worked until midnight. It felt like déjà vu, except this time the fear wasn't panic. It was preparation. People finally understood why I'd built the way I did. As we finished, Claire looked at my wall and said, "I used to think this looked paranoid. Now it looks like the smartest thing in town." I told her, "Paranoia is just preparation that hasn't paid off yet." The wind picked up 2 days later. Gusts screamed down the street like angry ghosts. The first bands of rain hit before noon. The sky turned greenish-gray, the kind that makes birds vanish and dogs hide under beds. The power grid failed around 3 p.m. I switched on the generator. Within minutes, my house glowed like a beacon while everything else went dark. Through the storm camera feeds, I saw debris whipping through the streets. Trash cans, branches, even someone's patio umbrella flying like a missile. Then came the pounding on my door. For a heartbeat, I thought it might be another neighbor looking for help. When I opened it, I saw her, Denise, hair wild, soaked to the bone, flashlight shaking in her hand. "It's worse than they said," she gasped. "My roof's gone. Please." For a moment, I just stared. There was something raw in her eyes. No pride, no control, just fear. I stepped aside. "Come in." She hesitated, like she couldn't believe the invitation was real. When she finally crossed the threshold, I could almost see the weight fall off her shoulders. "You remembered my warning," she said quietly. "I did," I replied. She sank onto the couch, trembling, clutching her phone. "The shelters are full. The HOA office flooded. Nobody's answering." Her voice cracked. I handed her a blanket and said, "You're safe here." By nightfall, 3 more neighbors joined us. Claire, an elderly couple from the corner, and a young family with 2 kids. We rationed food, lit lanterns, and listened to the wind pound the walls. Every so often, someone would flinch when debris hit the metal shutters. Denise just sat silently, staring into space. When the storm reached its peak, the house shook, but held. The generator hummed steadily. I'd fortified every inch for moments like this. At some point after midnight, there was a loud crash outside, something heavy slamming into the side yard. I grabbed my flashlight and opened the back door just enough to see a fallen power pole sparking in the rain. The transformer exploded in a flash of blue light that lit up the entire neighborhood. Denise screamed. I slammed the door shut. The smell of ozone filled the air. We spent the next 3 hours in near darkness, the storm howling like it wanted revenge. Denise whispered, "I'm sorry," so softly I almost missed it. "For what?" I asked. "For everything," she said. "For making you the villain when you were the only one trying to protect us." I didn't answer. There was nothing to say. The apology wasn't for me, it was for herself. By dawn, the worst had passed. The wind died to a moan, and the rain slowed to a steady drizzle. I stepped outside to survey the damage. Trees lay uprooted, cars half submerged, mailboxes gone. But my property was intact, again. The wall had deflected the worst of the wind, the pumps had kept the water out. Even the floodlights still worked. Then I saw what was left of Denise's house. The roof was gone. 2 walls collapsed inward, furniture scattered across the yard like confetti. She came outside behind me, wrapped in the blanket. When she saw it, her knees nearly gave out. I caught her arm before she fell. "It's gone," she whispered. "Everything." I wanted to tell her it was just stuff, but I knew it wasn't. For someone like Denise, her home wasn't just walls and furniture. It was status, control, her entire identity. Watching it vanish overnight must have felt like losing herself. She turned to me and said, "If I'd listened to you last year," her voice broke. I didn't gloat. I just said, "You're here. That's what matters." Within hours, the neighborhood became a crisis zone. City trucks rolled in, cutting fallen lines and clearing debris. Helicopters thumped overhead. Reporters showed up, asking if anyone had safe shelter. Word spread quickly that my property was the only structurally sound one on the street. By noon, emergency responders were using my yard as a supply hub again. Déjà vu. Claire helped distribute water. The young family helped charge radios using my solar system. Denise, surprisingly, organized people into small cleanup teams. It was like watching a ghost regain form. She gave quiet directions, nothing like her old bossy tone, more like someone trying to make amends through action. By evening, the mayor himself arrived, surveying the area. When he saw the fortified house, he nodded approvingly. "Looks like your design saved a lot of people again," he said. "We're recommending your layout as a model for post-storm reconstruction." Reporters caught that quote, and by nightfall, it was online. Local man's fortified home becomes disaster command center. Denise saw it too. She didn't speak, but I noticed her eyes glisten when she looked at the screen. Later, when everyone else had gone to sleep in the living room, she approached me quietly. "They're calling you a hero now," she said. I shrugged. "I just built a house." She smiled faintly. "No, you built proof. Proof that preparation isn't selfish, it's survival." Then, almost shyly, she pulled something from her pocket, a folded piece of paper, water-stained but legible. It was an HOA bylaw amendment draft dated months earlier, the one she'd tried to push before resigning. She handed it to me. "This was supposed to limit structures like yours." I kept a copy, as a reminder of how stupid I was. She laughed softly. "You can burn it if you want." I thought she'd finally retreat in humiliation. Instead, she doubled down. She filed another complaint, this time claiming emotional distress from public ridicule caused by a neighbor's social media negligence. It was laughable, but it told me something. She wasn't trying to win anymore. She just wanted to drag me down with her. So I changed my strategy. I stopped reacting publicly. No comments, no responses, no mockery. Instead, I quietly forwarded everything to my lawyer and a local journalist who'd covered her before. Within a week, a new article dropped. Former HOA president faces legal trouble after false public notices. The city confirmed she'd forged the investigation sign. It was over. But I didn't feel triumphant. Watching her unravel so completely was almost sad. She wasn't the monster she used to be, just a lonely woman trying to claw back relevance. A week later, a moving truck appeared in front of her house. She was gone by sundown. No goodbyes. No note. Just empty windows and an overgrown lawn. For the first time in months, I felt genuine peace. No letters. No inspectors. Just quiet. The neighborhood followed my lead now, installing better drainage, flood barriers, reinforced roofs. Even the new HOA board asked me to advise on safety planning. Irony never felt so satisfying. One evening, as I sat on the porch watching the sunset, Claire walked over with 2 mugs of coffee. "You finally won," she said. I smiled. No one wins in an HOA war. Someone just gets tired first. She laughed. "Well, at least you turned your house into the safest place in the county." I looked at the sturdy wall, the solar panels catching the last light, the quiet hum of the generator. "I didn't build it to win," I said. "I built it to last." That night, I got an email from an unfamiliar address. The subject line made my stomach twist. From Denise. The message was short. "You were right about the storms. Another one's coming. Don't let them stop you. D." Attached was a weather alert. Category 4 system projected to hit within the week. I stared at the screen, unsure whether it was a warning or an apology. Maybe both.